and welcome to another Friday afternoon edition of the really live Business of Cannabis talk show we call Green Rush Live here on Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and over the next couple of hours, we're going to be talking about testing procedures in the cannabis industry. There's a lot of controversy going on in various states, and sure enough, we've got lab people and scientists from all over the country coming in to chit chat and answer some of the questions that we might have about some of the inconsistencies in testing, not just in lab to lab or product to product, but state to state as well. And we've got a pretty damn good lineup, and I'm going to obviously welcome in my pals Doug Miller and Josh Kincaid with us this afternoon. And since it is the third Friday of the month, we also have our friend from Normal in Washington, D.C. His name is Morgan Fox. Morgan, again, thank you for showing up and being here for us every month.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right. So the million-dollar question every week, Morgan, we want to know what the heck is going on with Chuck Schumer, meeting with some bipartisan group in the Senate. Perhaps something might evolve out of those talks. What's the latest on any kind of federal reform in Washington, D.C.?
Well, conversations are ongoing about the path that cannabis policy reform is going to take in the Senate. Earlier this year, Senate Majority Leader Schumer met with Democratic colleagues who have been leaders on this issue in the Senate, and is now starting to cross over the aisle to determine what might be feasible in the current session, based on a lot of the negotiations that happened both before and after the midterm elections last year. As I'm sure that you and your viewers recall, there was a last-ditch attempt to attach banking and expungement and Second Amendment protections to several must-pass spending packages, and unfortunately, those were blocked by Senator McConnell. But at the same time, we probably could have gotten the votes for at least some of those things had Senate Majority Leader Schumer introduced them as standalones earlier in the year instead of waiting until the very last minute. But there's plenty of blame to go around as far as that's concerned. But now in the current Congress, we are already seeing movement on incremental legislation in the House. We've already seen bills be introduced relating to research and veterans protection and access, and several other items. So, I think that, there's definitely still a lot of appetite to get things done on the House side. The question is going to be what gets prioritized both there as well as in the Senate, and what is actually feasible to be passed. A good indicator is that, this week, in fact, just yesterday, for what I believe is the very first time, a Senate committee, that being the Veterans Affairs Committee, approved a bill to study the potential medical benefits of cannabis for various conditions that are very prominent in the veteran community. This is definitely a good first step, and everything that I'm seeing says that this particular bill is being fast-tracked. We saw the introduction of the House Companion as well pretty recently, and I expect that we will probably see movement on the House side as well in terms of committee hearings. But I don't see a lot of opposition there. Unfortunately, this particular bill doesn't have a whole lot of impact. It's great that it would direct the VA to study these things, but it doesn't really create a requirement that they do so. There's an odd distinction between observational data and clinical studies that doesn't really make much sense. But also, there's plenty of information already available, both scientific and anecdotal, that cannabis helps veterans treat a number of conditions, everything from PTSD to traumatic brain injuries or chronic pain. So we don't necessarily need to do more research in order for the VA to solidify its policies. But we've already seen the introduction of another bill by Representative Stubbe from Florida that would actually codify the policies that exist currently at the VA into law, being that if you're a medical cannabis patient in compliance with state law, that you don't have to worry about having your benefits impacted or other forms of treatment offered through the VA impacted either. So we already have legislators that are trying to move past that.
And some of the stories you brought up are right in the middle of, actually right at the beginning of our weekly We Talk news show that follows the 2-hour really live stream we're doing right now. That'll be coming up at 6 o'clock. And one of the biggest stories that has evolved over the last week is the softening of what I call censorship by Twitter and by Google folks on cannabis. Now, when we put cannabis in quotes on that because there's a difference between the hemp world and topicals and that sort of thing versus the THC infused other items that are involved as well. But is this not a good sign, a softening of some of the community guidelines of some of the biggest social media companies, that this could be a good sign that might trickle down into the coffers of the federal government?
Well, on the one hand, it's a step in the right direction that social media companies are starting to loosen some of their restrictions, which frankly have been insane over the years, to the point where a lot of these restrictions were not just applying to people that were actually trying to sell cannabis products or hemp products, but were actually being applied to advocacy organizations. I mean, every single organization that I've worked with has faced problems with getting their ads rejected or being shadow banned in some fashion, simply because the word cannabis was mentioned. And the nature of these companies is such that it's very difficult to get such bans or restrictions lifted, even if you can prove to them that you're not actually selling cannabis products. Now, while on the surface this is a step in the right direction, I do worry that there might be some unintended consequences of this, because based on the actual nature of the new allowances, which are really pretty much limited to products that meet the legal definition of legal hemp, so beneath 0.3% THC. This is going to open the door for a lot of unregulated producers to be able to advertise, while regulated producers and retailers will still not be able to.
That's interesting. All right, I got Josh Kincaid, Doug Miller here alongside. I want to get them involved with this as well so that they can ask you some of the questions they might have. Josh, go ahead. You can go first.
Well, I mean, first off, I think anytime the government is getting involved and they're allowing for it, and that discussion is allowed, especially for veterans who have PTSD and so many other ailments, I think that's a positive. I mean, overall, are we gaining more acceptance? I mean, that in and of itself is huge news. And just the fact that they're accepting it and allowing it and discussing it. Is there any talks about having MMJ scripts and allowing for medical cannabis use by veterans prescribed, or having more resources for them inside of the VA?
Absolutely. And this conversation has been going on for quite a while. In the previous Congress, there was a lot of effort being put towards passing bills that would not only codify protections for medical cannabis patients, but also would explicitly allow VA doctors to be able to recommend medical cannabis in states where it's legal. And then we saw a lot of other legislation related to those issues, such as amendments to the NDAA that would have prevented the VA from discriminating against veterans who work in the medical cannabis or in the cannabis industry from being denied home loans through the VA system, and a whole slew of other things, and ranging from like we're seeing right now, simple studies to really, really robust protections and restoration of rights, and making sure that they can continue to get the treatment and benefits that they deserve if they're cannabis consumers, whether medical or legal and compliant adult users. We're seeing that continuation, or we're seeing a continuation of that conversation now. Like I said, we already saw a bill that goes a lot farther than the bill that was approved in the Senate committee, introduced in the House already. And I expect that we're going to see the reintroduction of the Veterans Equal Access Act within the next month or so, hopefully as soon as possible. And then, we're not really seeing a lot of pushback on this particular issue. And I think that this is kind of indicative of a general growing acceptance of cannabis issues generally among members of Congress. I think a lot of people were really scared that we wouldn't be able to get anything done in such a divided Congress. But I think that there's a lot of ability for us to get some incremental measures passed relating to veterans and expungement and banking and a number of other issues that will help raise the bar and get lawmakers more comfortable with supporting these issues. Just from my own personal experience, I can tell you that just walking around the halls of Congress and doing drop-ins in congressional offices on both the Senate and House side, in years past, when you asked, the people at reception who was in charge of the cannabis portfolio, they oftentimes would have no idea, or they'd have to look around. And every single office that I've dropped into unexpectedly this year, they can immediately point me towards who's handling the cannabis issues. And I think that is indicative of a real sea change in terms of how seriously this issue is being taken in Congress.
Oh, that is a good sign. All right, Doug, you're next, pal.
All right, so I have a different question. I want to know, what have you heard about the gun laws and cannabis licenses? Because apparently they're saying that you can have a gun permit and a cannabis license. Then you hear you're not allowed to have a gun permit and a cannabis license. What have you been hearing on Washington? And because I know it's been a debate lately, so I was just kind of wondering what you've heard.
Well, so very recently there was a ruling by a judge in the federal Western District of Oklahoma that basically said that you cannot be discriminated against or have your Second Amendment rights curtailed because you are a cannabis consumer or of any sort. Unfortunately, that's not universally binding, but it does set an excellent precedent. And I think that it's going to force the Department of Justice to really rethink some of its rationale in trying to challenge lawsuits that are based on this issue. Now, lawsuits aside, we are seeing legislative movement on this. Already this year, we've seen Representative Mooney from West Virginia, along with Representatives Mast and several other Republican co-sponsors, introduce legislation that would explicitly protect the rights of medical cannabis patients in terms of their Second Amendment rights. I expect that we will see another bill be introduced in the relatively near future that would go beyond that and protect all cannabis users that are in compliance with state law from having to answer that question and risk perjuring themselves on federal firearm purchase application forms. So we're definitely seeing movement in that area, both in the courts and on the Hill. And I think that this is a perfect example of one of those incremental issues that we can address in a Republican-led House, and that could very easily see movement even in a democratically led Senate, because this isn't necessarily about guns. This is about discrimination against cannabis consumers. And so it's something that I think people on both sides of the aisle can get behind, because it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it certainly doesn't fit the DOJ's definition of why people should be denied these rights, where their motions to dismiss lawsuits have basically compared anybody who uses cannabis to a violent domestic abuser.
Can you dumb that down for me on a state level? How can we at the state level supersede federal level? It's the same equivalent of if you wear denim, you can't vote. How is that legal?
Mm-hmm. Well, so really, this is an issue with the Federal Firearms Act, and so there is a form that you have to fill out whenever you're purchasing a firearm, no matter where you are. And there's a line on that form that explicitly says that you have to check, like, are you addicted to or currently using illegal substances? And there's an addendum that says something along the lines of, even if cannabis is legal for medical or recreational purposes in the state in which you reside. So if you're purchasing a firearm and you say, no, I'm not, addicted to marijuana, or no, or you basically lie on that form, you are open to federal perjury charges, which can carry several years in prison if convicted. But the Federal Firearms Act, which I believe was passed in the early 90s, it was has jurisdiction over the entire country. So no matter what the state laws are with regard to cannabis, the federal law when it comes to firearms still holds. Now, a number of states have actually taken measures to address this. states like Oregon and Michigan, I believe, and several others have taken steps to change their state laws with regard to things like concealed carry licenses, where they made specific exceptions for people that are medical patients in compliance with those states' laws. But you still have to deal with the issue of federal law. So, and unfortunately, they still have jurisdiction in this area.
Yeah, I know. And go back to the veterans. A lot of veterans that won't get the medical card because of that reason, because obviously they like to have their gun permits, and yeah, it's a whole gray area, and it's terrible because it's like, hey, these veterans went and fought for their life. They come back, cannabis works for them, but you don't want to give them the proper medication because you want to argue about a gun. They have the right to have a gun, and yeah, it's just a crazy thing.
And to be clear, we really haven't seen so much issue with possession of firearms, especially if they're purchased legally. But purchasing has been an issue. People are put in a position where they have to either commit perjury on a federal firearm form, or be denied their ability to purchase a firearm. So this is definitely something that we need to change, and that affects a lot of people, particularly veterans and former law enforcement, who are among the plaintiffs in the lawsuit filed by former Florida official Nikki Fried, who since leaving office has dropped off of that lawsuit, but I believe the other plaintiffs have continued that suit.
Can I ask you a couple of things? You mentioned a few things about both sides of the aisle, and we talk about a la carte issues that you think might be incremental steps towards a bigger goal of, and I don't like to use the word legalization, I'm big on normalization, but getting it off Schedule 1, the DOJ investigation into whether or not cannabis has any medicinal benefits. Meanwhile, we've got hundreds of thousands of people that have medical cards and using it medicinally. So what are some of those incremental issues that you see that perhaps the other side of the aisle, as opposed to the Democrat, the other side, might be interested in talking about? And I would think that I would still maintain, I don't understand how banking hasn't moved forward. I don't care what political party you are.
Well, I think banking is definitely on the table for the current congressional session. As we've already discussed, Second Amendment protections and veterans' access and protections are certainly on the table. Research absolutely is on the table. I think that we can probably expect to see some movement, or at least hopefully we'll see some movement in protecting federal employees as well as people seeking security clearances from being discriminated against for past or present cannabis use. That one might be a little bit of a tougher slog, but I think that it's 100% within the realm of possibility. We're just waiting to see that. There are also a lot of other issues, I think, on the margins as well that could potentially move forward. I mean, I think that we're absolutely going to see a continuation of the appropriations prohibition against the DOJ interfering with state medical cannabis programs. And I think that it's very possible that we'll see that extended to adult use programs as well, provided that we do enough outreach to, really folks on both sides of the aisle, because this doesn't have unanimous Democratic support either. But I think it's very possible that we could see that move forward as well. So, there may be other issues that come up as well. I think ones that probably stand a little bit less of a chance of passing through a GOP-controlled House are things like access to SBA loans and grant programs by cannabis businesses. But I'm really hoping that I'm wrong. However, I do think that, in addition to things like banking, we might be able to see bankruptcy protections enacted in the current session for not only cannabis businesses themselves, but for the individuals that work at them. And, right now, it's a really bad situation that we're in, where, a lot of times people that are working for cannabis businesses are ineligible to be able to file for bankruptcy, or at least have a much more difficult time doing so. And that is really unfortunate when you look at the fact that a lot of cannabis businesses are failing because of overtaxation and because of overregulation and lack of federal change.
And I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss California's move towards looking for partnerships on interstate commerce. Is that a possibility state to state, even though federal hasn't changed much when it comes to looking at the law?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the federal government has the final say so when it comes to interstate commerce. That being said, states can certainly enter into these compacts and test the DOJ. You know, see if they're going to interfere with it. I mean, every single legal cannabis system, whether medical or adult use right now, is illegal at the federal level. So the question is, how far can they go before the federal government decides to step in and put a stop to it, if they will at all? You know, I think that this is kind of ripe for a test case. And also the fact that this might be compacts between just a handful of states will not only give us a lot of data before we start seeing real serious movement towards federal descheduling and allowing interstate commerce throughout the country, but will also provide the sort of slow roll in that a lot of advocates who are concerned about you know, instant initiation of the dormant commerce clause that could come with descheduling would have on state markets, and in particular, you know, state market social equity programs. So, you know, I think that, you know, it's really just up to these states about, you know, whether or not, well, first of all, whether or not they're able to find recipient states, you know, import states that are willing to enter into these compacts. And I've heard that New Jersey and some other states have been potentially interested in that, but I haven't seen any legislative action along those lines within those states yet. But also how far these state governments are willing to go to test the DOJ in terms of their patience for behavior that is federally illegal.
Oregon passed that 2 years ago, contingent on federal, which could that part could be lifted, and then they could trade between California and Oregon in a similar fashion that Portland was running to Vancouver, Washington, when Washington legalized, and we have all these neighboring states, right? So I would disagree with your comment that the feds have the final say. We have jury nullification. So even if you do get busted, maybe the jury knows about it and they'll nullify you, and it won't happen. Court of public opinion is another way of saying that. But when you see neighboring states and people jumping across the board, I think we already see the writing on the wall. Money's there, and Oregon's there. California will follow suit. Washington, and then that'll just push the feds to say, okay, let's just open this up. And they don't want to fight it. They don't care.
I'm a big fan of jury nullification, but I guarantee you, any federal prosecutor that wants to push it can find a jury that will convict.
They're still out there. There are still plenty of people out there that don't want to have anything to do with this plant. And it is one of the biggest frustrations of anyone that I talk to that's in the cannabis industry. So as usual, Morgan, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on what is the latest towards federal legalization, normalization, movement, all of those neat issues that cannabis is right in the middle of. So Morgan, as always, thank you for coming on. We'll definitely see you in a few more weeks. We're going to take a break now. It is just after 4:20, after all, on a Friday afternoon. I'm going to sneak over to the chat room and leave the testing conversation to Doug and to Josh. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you gonna do tonight? Oh, just, you know, like every other night, just gonna lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
Welcome back to the Green Rush Live. I hope you enjoyed that little 420 break. And I just want to welcome two great guests. It's going to be interesting because we're going to get into some testing, and I love testing. So I want to welcome Callum Hilke from Safe Tiva Labs and Chris Hudala from Pro Verde. And they're two of the big labs out there that do all the testing. And I just want to have Callum introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself and the lab that he represents. And then we'll have Chris, and then we'll get into some questions. So go ahead, Callum. Let me hear about Safe Tiva Labs.
Well, Safe Tiva is up and coming in Western Massachusetts, based around a lot of manufacturers. Right now, we were founded on a dedication to getting fast and reliable turnaround times. We aim for next day, and we deliver. And we're also trying to reach out to lots of home growers in our local community as well.
Perfect. That sounds good. And Chris, let me hear about Pro Verde.
Sure. My name is Chris Hudala, and I'm the founder and chief scientific officer at Pro Verde Laboratories. We were one of the first laboratories in Massachusetts, established back in 2013. So we've kind of grown with the program, first under medical and then under adult use, but also work a lot with patients, caregivers, home growers, things like that. So pretty involved in the industry.
And Chris, I just want to ask you a question just to give the viewers a little idea of how it works when they send a product in, or a dispensary or a grower sends a product in to you guys. Can you just walk me through the steps? So you receive their product and then what happens?
Sure. If this is a regulatory sample, so it's controlled under the metric seed to sale tracking system, when it's delivered to us, there's a certain amount of weight verification, making sure that the metric tags are appropriate and match the sample. There's a lot of weight tracking that's associated with the transport in the metric within the metric system. Once that's logged into our system, it's photographed. So we're photographing both the package, the contents. We're doing a microscopic photograph as well. So we're looking for particulate matter or contaminants that are visual under the microscope that shouldn't be there. Once that's photographed, then it's separated into individual aliquots. It's basically portioned out into different portions of sample for the various tests that are being requested. The state requires certain panels, laboratory test batches for different types of matrices. So we may need to make sure that all those tests, that there's enough sample for all those and that they're being completed. After they're weighed out for those individual tests, then they kind of go their own direction. There's different sample prep approaches or procedures for pesticides that is different from heavy metals. But at the end of the day, after all the testing is done, then the data comes together in a central database, LIMS system, Laboratory Information Management System, which is then reviewed, and then the certificates are generated. Those certificates then are sent back to the client at the same time that the analytical test data is pushed to the state's metric database.
That was a great explanation. I really appreciate it, because people don't realize how involved the testing process is. People think they just send it in, you pop it in a machine, and it just spits out these results, and then that's it. I actually understand the testing side of things, so I understand the process of it and how involved it really is. So so Callum, one question for you: what's the most common heavy metals that you generally come across?
Lead by far, I would say. It's usually never enough to trigger the state's action limits, but we see it far more than any other heavy metal like cadmium or arsenic or something along those sorts.
Is that similar for you, Chris? Is that what you see? A lot of lead?
It depends on the grower. We typically see a little bit more on the cadmium side. But we can usually, when we're working with clients and have issues, we can usually track it down to their either their grow media or more commonly the nutrients that they're using.
Interesting. Josh, you have any questions about testing?
Yeah, I'm curious. I know there's a lot of different testing methods, so I'm just curious what you guys have settled on. I don't even know how many different types there are. There's liquid chromatography and gas. But what do you guys use, and how can you compare that in terms of accuracy and reliability?
This is only a half-hour show. Well, I think in general, most cannabinoid potencies are being done today by liquid chromatography. In the early days, gas chromatography was more common, but gas chromatography, you are converting the acid form to the neutral, and so you lose some information in the analysis. So the standard for most flower potency, at least, would be HPLC, or liquid chromatography. Heavy metals, it's very common to use ICP-MS. It's inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. There are other techniques. There's several other techniques. For any one of these, there's multiple ways to assess the analytes of interest. Probably one of the biggest differences between laboratories would be the procedure or the process for testing microbial contaminants, because there's a lot of competing theories and competing technologies. We have ours that we stand behind. We've tried to validate the others and found very unfavorable test results with the other technologies that are available.
And getting into that unfavorable test results, how do you see things? Because as you were just saying, it's you can send certain products to 3 different labs and you can get 3 different results. And you guys are obviously in the industry. Is there any way to explain that to anybody? How that could be possible? Is there just a different equipment that people use? Or
Yeah,
I'll let Callum start with that one.
yeah, it's a bit of a twofold problem, I'd say. Is like the big problem being is batches of, for example, say flour are about 15 pounds, and the amount required for testing is about 10 grams. It is not even a percent, like barely even like a 0.1% of the overall batch. So it becomes that you can pull several different samples from that batch, and depending on the plant it's from, the like the storage conditions, you can get just kind of a variety. Just because 10 grams is really not going to be a super representative sample in a lot of cases.
And it also depends where you actually take your sample off the flour.
Yes.
I mean, you take it from the top of the product and it's been in sunlight. Obviously, it's going to have a lower THC because the sun makes it lower. And anything that was lower.
Actually, it's higher. So the more light it gets, the more production, cannabinoid production. So the top and bottom of the plant can differ by 50%. So the light basically energizes the process for the biosynthesis of cannabinoids and terpenes.
Well, that's great to know. Thank you for enlightening me.
So
That
pick
was
the
great.
top bud.
So yeah, you picked the top bud to get tested. Now do growers test the top and the bottom to see what it's going to be? I mean, you can kind of get a little bit of an idea what's you have in the middle.
In theory, they're supposed to be, all of the buds are supposed to be homogenized. So you would submit a representative sample, which means statistically you're hoping that you get some top bud, some middle bud, some lower bud, because you want to have a representative sample of the whole batch. As Callum was saying, 10 grams is not very indicative or representative of a 15-pound batch. So sometimes it's hard to get a representative sample. One of the biggest challenges we see when people are submitting to different labs is they'll pick 3 buds from the same plant and send them to 3 different labs, and then they get 3 different results. Well, they should. Those were 3 different buds. You don't know, one might have come off the top plant, one might have come off the bottom. So when people want to challenge the labs, which I highly recommend they do it with some foresight, such that they are mixing it, chop those buds into thirds and then mix them all together and then submit a random sample. But you want to actually be sending the same sample to the 3 labs.
That makes a very good point. And we have a question from online, from the chat room. I just want to ask, are you guys going to be participating in the ASTM Cannabis Conference, as they're going to be setting testing precedents?
So we work with ASTM and AOAC and USP. So there's many scientific organizations that have been working on standardization of testing methods. The USP, the United States Pharmacopoeia, has been working with the FDA for decades and is taking a leading role. ASTM is also working with USP. So there's a lot of collaboration that's starting to happen. And we tend to work with all of them just because we need to make sure that the contributions of the methods that we're providing are consistent across the industry for the various groups that are participating.
How about you, Cal?
I unfortunately am not high enough in the organization to talk about any collaborating, but I would rest assured to say that we any developments we try to keep on top of, and testing being streamlined is of course a very important one as precedents are set, and we'll be paying attention to kind of see what standards are come up with.
So how often do you guys see mold get set, like moldy product or flour gets sent to the labs?
Often.
Very often? Really?
Very often, yes. Multiple times a day.
Is that the number one contaminant, or what are you guys seeing in terms of things that are coming through? What's a common contaminant that you guys are seeing?
I would say yeast and mold's the number one.
Yeah.
What's the cause of that and mitigations?
The cause can be it can be manyfold. Sometimes buds can grow so like large and tight that they can actually lock moisture in, and more or less that's just there's not going to be no circulation. Mold's going to grow. It could also be storage conditions. I've worked in manufacturers before, and just sometimes facilities aren't the best, and that can cause storage issues and such as well, to cause mold growth. And really, mitigation comes down to making sure you maintain a nice, clean, dry storage space. And it can also come down to the type of strains you grow, because some of the terpenes that are grown have some antimicrobial effects. And I've seen strains per se that I will never see mold on, but I can also see strains that will just be riddled with it.
Can you tell us what strains you do see that never have it and which ones generally have it?
The one that comes to mind most often is GMO is practically indestructible, from what I've seen, and it's just I don't know why no
the
mold grows
namesake
on it. And like other strains, there's just a lot that mold can grow on, and a lot of them. I've seen a lot of mold grown on a lot of different strains. GMO stands out as the creme de la creme when it comes to not having yeast and mold.
That's really interesting. What about you, Chris? What's the top contaminants you're seeing, some of the causes, and do you have any mitigations for those?
Yeah, so by far, Colum's right. The mold is probably the most problematic. We will routinely go out to our customers' facilities and do environmental swabs. We'll swab the grow tables, the drains, the HVAC system, and we'll look for sources of contamination. And frequently we find it. One of the biggest problems that we see in mold is a very specific species, Penicillium citrinum, which is a systemic mold, which gets in the tissue of the plant. And so oftentimes it's not visible. And so our clients are very surprised when they see mold failures because they didn't see any mold on the plant. That's a pretty challenging mold. We believe that it may be in the grow medium that they're using, and it actually gets taken up in the roots of the plant. So really the mitigation would be just doing some routine testing in-house for your own soil or grow medium. We provide our clients with SOPs and kits, micro kits, to do their own in-house testing to assess that. That's been very helpful at helping them before they actually start to grow to see if they have a problem in their grow medium. Again, Callum was right that hygiene, disinfecting a grow room. There's a lot of commercial products on the market which are very efficient, very non-toxic. So we like to see them using non-toxic kill agents. And then right now, a lot of the producers have the ability to do remediation. So if they have moldy product, remediation is becoming a pretty standard practice in the industry. There's multiple techniques available, from X-ray and microwave and ozone that are all available. Those are not, I believe they're not prohibited or permitted under the Massachusetts regulations. So it's a little bit of a free-for-all there. But they are being used widely.
What about
Are
the
any of the
PG?
Go ahead, Josh.
I was wondering about the PGRs because you mentioned a dense nug, or somebody mentioned really tight buds, and there's plant growth regulators that kind of create this dense bud. And for me, it kind of, I don't know, like it's similar to a cutting agent in a vape that causes me to cough. I get that same kind of cough. Is that prevalent where you guys are at? Are you seeing a lot of PGRs and people using alternatives just to make it look and or feel more desirable? And what are some of the drawbacks on that, other than maybe coughing for me?
So Massachusetts doesn't test for a lot of these compounds. Massachusetts probably has the shortest list of compounds that are being tested for. So we're not really looking for a lot of these.
Interesting. Okay.
Are any of the accredited labs in multi-states? Or is it like a lab just kind of is in one state? Because you don't ever hear of any multi-state operations. At least I never have. I was just wondering if you guys are familiar.
Say that. What's your question?
Does any of the labs like Pro Verde, do you have any labs in any other states?
We have a small facility in Maine, but there's several labs that have in multiple jurisdictions.
Okay. Perfect. And what's the oddest thing you guys ever found in a cannabis flower when you were testing it?
Oddest thing.
Is it like it's like a crazy metal, or did you just come across something and were like, wow, that's weird. I never thought I'd see that day. Like, I just wondering if there's anything real crazy that just came across your plate and you just had something crazy to tell us.
I had a batch of sauce I tested that came across at about 17.5% terpenes, which was like insane. Like I retested it. I sent it out to another lab and it confirmed it. And I thought that was like, wow, nearly almost a fifth terpenes. I've never seen that.
Wow.
It's probably toxic at that concentration.
Yeah, it'd probably kill you.
We've had some samples in it was a again, it was a sauce, but it was like a hot sauce or something that under the microscope, there was actually live little squiggly things dancing around in there. That was surprising.
Yeah, and again, you don't see these things to the naked eye, and you take them under a microscope, and then all of a sudden you see like organisms growing in what you're about to ingest into your body. It's kind of crazy when you do it. And like you said before, people were very surprised when they failed a mold test, and you're like, well, yeah, it's growing in your flower, but it's not visible. And I wanted to ask you something, Chris, because you said you swabbed the HVAC place. How many times do you find them contaminated?
In general, 100%.
That's what I figured. I was waiting for that answer.
It's really challenging to completely decontaminate a room. So even in the trim areas, we're working with a couple of producers for antimicrobial agents that are, again, very non-toxic that can be used to mist or fog a room. There are some fogging chemicals that are used, but they're highly toxic. That you have special safety concerns, especially in light of, the fatality here in Massachusetts. When you start using some of these very toxic reagents, especially for fogging a room, you have to start thinking about employee safety concerns and how do you make sure that an employee doesn't go into a room that's being fogged. And so really focusing on very effective, non-toxic antimicrobial agents is key. And so we're doing a lot of research with producers of these antimicrobial agents to demonstrate that they are effective at both kill and prevention of microorganisms.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I assume that the HVAC units were definitely a big provider of the mold spores, because once it gets in them, I mean, you just have one contamination and you literally have to change your HVAC units, and that's not feasible. So I was wondering how it's prevented, and if it happens, then what happens? But clearly you're saying they're pretty much 100% of the time contaminated.
Even with the Oregon fires that happened a few years ago, a lot of farms were popping for mold, and like, well, we didn't have any, we didn't see it, whatever. And then they figured it came through the filtration system and HVAC from the Eastern Oregon fires. And so a lot of the Portland area that had none of those issues were getting these airborne mold spores, and that was popping everybody. So that kind of threw the Northwest or West Coast into a loop. And so I'm curious, like, what's going to be the fallout for Ohio and that train derailment and all of the issues with plants, pets, fish, everything dying? They're saying that people's DNA are changing. I've seen photos of cars. It's crazy. So no Ohio cannabis for me anytime soon. What's going to happen indoors, outdoors with situations like that? Chris, go ahead. I know you're eager to jump at that one.
Well, so we don't know. You know, we play with nature, and a lot of the impacts that we're causing, we're not actually going to know what the full impact is for years. So take the creation of synthetic cannabinoids, all the Delta 8 products that are on the market. We've tested close to 5,000 of these products that are based on isomerization reactions, and we have not yet seen one that does not have significant amounts of contaminants. By significant amounts of contaminants, I'm talking up to 30 or 40% of it are contaminated, unknown molecular structures that are not found in nature. So if you think about the number of people who are smoking or vaping these synthetic products, we have no idea how that's going to impact the next generations, you know, after years of vaping these synthetics.
There's been hypochlorous acid that's been used to get rid of mold, mildew, spider mites, and other contaminants naturally. Is there any other products, or would you agree with that, disagree with that? And do you know of anything else that might help with these in a more natural form?
I've seen assassin bugs used to help deal with mites and such before. It seems, at least from what I've seen, a relatively safe way to control mites. It's just you have to make sure to spread them out, and they'll just murder all the little pests that they come across.
How good are I was gonna say butterflies. Ladybugs. There you go. How good are ladybugs? 'Cause I know a lot of growers put ladybugs in their grows for that to control the pests. Do you guys ever hear of that? Is that at all? Does that happen often?
Not that I know of, at least.
I've seen a couple of home grows where they use ladybugs. I don't know that many commercial operations are using them. There are a lot of reagents on the market now, some using nano silver or natural surfactants like fatty acids. These are naturally plant produced, very non-toxic, that disrupt the propagation of some microorganisms.
All right. Now I have one last question to wrap it up. So when you buy your soil in a bag, say from a certain company, you're saying some of that soil is contaminated, that some of the grow companies are actually selling contaminated soil? Or is it when people are mixing different things? Because obviously the cannabis plant does suck up almost everything through the root system. So that's where we get a lot of the toxic metals. And you guys said lead was and other metals are pretty prevalent. So is stuff that we're buying in on like in the stores, is that contaminated?
We don't know. There's a good chance that it could be. It doesn't take much to get contaminated. I mean, where do these soils come from? They typically come from outside. Do you know what the failure rate is for microbial contamination in an outdoor grown cannabis plant? 100%. There's just too many microbes. There's too much mold. There's too much bacteria in the outside, that if you have something that comes from outside, you don't necessarily want to bring it into your facility without some kind of sterilization. I know people who autoclave their soil or their grow media just to make sure that there's no bad microbes. But the other thing is that microbes are necessary for the growth, so that's also a detriment as well, because you're killing beneficial bacteria and microbes. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I really appreciate your time, both of you. Thank you very much for teaching us a lot about testing. I love the subject, to be honest with you. Obviously, you both love it because you're in the industry. And again, thank you so much. Josh, do you have anything else to wrap it up, or?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, wait for the next segment to keep it rolling.
Yeah, I think that was amazing, guys. Thanks a lot again, Callum and Chris from Callum's from Safe TV Labs, Chris from Pro Verde. Thank you so much for joining us on Green Rush Live today.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. And we will catch everybody in a few minutes. Go ahead, have another smoke break, and we'll be right back.
The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Cannatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at cannatrols.com.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.
Which at first I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm an activist, but I have, held a bullhorn on the State House steps. I have frequently testified before the Cannabis Control Commission and the state legislature, and I'm not, shy about criticizing where I see, mistakes being made. So yeah, I think that's what differentiates me, just an appreciation for the plant. And then also I'm a cannabis entrepreneur myself. I've started businesses, so I've lived that entrepreneurial journey. I know how hard it is. It is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. So I think that, I'm in the game, not just on the sidelines.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore, so I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now, if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegits filtration system. What? The Weegits.com, Weegits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems. Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weegits filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCM TV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Welcome back to the Green Rush Live. I'm Doug Miller with my co-host Josh Kincaid, and we have a special guest for this half hour. His name is Jay Fagerstrom, and he is from VRX Labs. Jay, thank you very much for taking this Friday afternoon to join us. And please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about VRX Labs.
So VRX Labs is a cannabis compliant lab in California, Long Beach specifically. We've been in business a couple of years. It's a full compliant lab, full testing. And just now we're going through our ISO recertification this next week, and we are hitting the market again. We understand that there's a lot of opportunity. We are from the industry, working in the industry. We are not corporate people, and we are looking to get back to the grassroots, raise the level of optimism in compliant cannabis, and move on.
Approximately how many products do you sample or get into sample per day?
On average, we're looking at 10 to 20 samples per day. And we run about 25 days a month.
Okay.
And are you in California? Is that right?
Yes, sir. Long Beach, California.
And how far out do those products come from?
We are generally within about a 50-mile radius. Mostly we service the industry within about 25 miles. We have enough compliant cannabis in that area to suffice us.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we have our other guest, Sam, just joined us from Point Labs. Sam, welcome to the show. And that's Jay.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. Tell us a little bit about On Point Labs, and then we'll continue back with Jay, and we'll have a great conversation about labs.
Absolutely, yeah. So On Point Labs is a 10,000 square foot facility in a place called Snowflake, Arizona. We're about 3.5 hours north and east of where Super Bowl 57 was robbed from the Philadelphia Eagles just this last weekend. So, but yeah, that's where we're at. And we're there because that's where a lot of the agricultural center of the state is, particularly in terms of cannabis, but for a variety of different products as well.
So Jay, getting back to you, what are some of the issues that you see coming in with the products that you're testing? Is it mold? Is it heavy metals? What are the main issues?
Depending on the products, the flower is mostly been the mold. In the and some shopping, not really a bunch right now. I mean, a lot of the market in California has gotten on top of this. Their R&D is in front of a lot of the testing before compliance, and they're meeting the standards before they're even putting it in the COA. It's not a guessing game.
How about you, Sam? What are some of the issues you see on the flower and other products?
You know, I think there are quite a few issues, but I think since we're all lab folks on this call, I can maybe say with some level of safety that maybe a lack of honesty from the producers in terms of where they may be failing and where they may be seeking help. Because I think one of the things, and this isn't about the producers or the qualities that they necessarily have themselves, but, you know, we have a team of 50 folks up there, and, you know, 2 of them have PhDs, many of them have advanced chemistry degrees, most of them have experience in controlled environment agriculture. You know, like, we can be a resource, But in so many of the markets that we operate, we're only seen as compliance. And I think that that's a real limiting thing. So I kind of went global with your question there, but I think that that's one of the issues that I see is not necessarily with product quality, but really just like a lack of trust that we can be more than just this provider of a checked box before you go sell your product.
All right, fellas, I'm taking a mental survey here. Keep a note. I like Doug's question about what cultivars or strains are you seeing the most infection and the most resilient? Go ahead, Jay. Do you have any strains that you're seeing consistently, like you're not seeing anything from, and then another strain?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question, to be frank with you, because I'm not seeing that kind of overview on strains. I wouldn't know where to start. I'd just be guessing. We have a consistency on that. We're not comparing and contrast like that in our lab. I wouldn't know how to answer that.
Fair enough. Yeah, Sam, are you seeing anything? You're muted, Sam.
Sorry. Yes, I am. I just had technical difficulties getting off of mute there. Sorry. Yeah, and this isn't, we haven't yet done, an elongated study on this or anything, but just recently with the customer, we were trying to look at some of the trend lines that we saw in some aspergillus results. And what we realized was there were a lot of derivatives of grape strains that were really having some issues, right? So if there was, a grape pie or, those types of cultivars were really having some trouble. And I don't know if it was that cultivar, just for this producer, or if maybe there's some genetic reality with, the original crosses that came from that kind of down the line. But that was kind of a hot hub that just is top of mind right there, Josh. Thank you.
What kind of issues were you seeing with that product?
Oh, we were looking specifically at aspergillus and mold. So, I'm sorry, Jay, that I don't know all of the markets that you're in, but we focus in Arizona, and in the Arizona regulated market, we have a zero tolerance. So if there's any detection, it's a failed sample. So we have quite a few customers that are really kind of geared into seeing what trends they can find, whether it's a particular room, maybe a side of a building. And maybe one thing I should say that is natural for me, but might not be for other folks across the country. About 95% of the flower that we see in the market is grown either indoor or in a heavily controlled greenhouse. We have very little outdoor flower in Arizona. So when we're talking about the cultivars, it isn't just the cultivar, but perhaps the environment in which it's also cultivated. And we see some different trends in that work as well.
Let's do the heat, Sam. Is that not necessarily a preference in growing techniques, but a requirement due to the area?
Yes, yeah, I would say that, even in the areas that aren't extreme, it still can get in the, mid to high 90s as a daytime temperature, right in, that kind of beautiful season for outdoor growing. So I should say you can definitely grow cannabis, right? But it isn't necessarily ones that consumers might want to see on a shelf and pay $70 an eighth for.
Yeah. I want to ask a question about legalization. Maybe Doug can ring me in back after that, but wondering how you guys are looking at labs as a regulatory approach. You've got Biden wanting to do some research and see if, patent 6630507 exists and what research Nixon did 40 years ago, whatever, I'm just curious if you guys are seeing lab testing as to support that scientific research and some potential implications on what medical and therapeutic applications could be to speed that up. Jay, do you want to go first?
No, sir. Once again, I have to apologize that I'm not in a position to answer that. What we're seeing a lot of I'm on the business side of it, and on the science part, we're seeing R&D to pre-test the material before they go into their compliant testing, but we're in a controlled environment that's been running since just past 96 legally. So they've worked out a lot of the issues as far as that is. So as far as the science and trying to expand on the information and the research we have, we're not getting that at all here.
Outside of just consumer safety and general practices, you talked about ISO and that kind of general normalization and certification process, and just kind of giving them peace of mind, I guess.
Yes, and the state requires that, and it gives us it helps our accreditation on that. We're fighting a lot of the lab shopping and what have you. And, being from the industry, we came from the grower side and ended up in a lab. And ironically, we're allowing the science to speak for itself. And we're the bridge between the people that are coming in that we're having a hard communication with the scientists. And so we can talk to the scientists and then go back to our clients. And that's kind of the bridge that we are now. And that's what we're seeing the trend is for us, is the communication between the labs and the producers was, it set the table for a lot of oddness in the shopping and the communication between the labs and the cultivators, the manufacturers.
You see that too, Sam?
Yeah. To piggyback on that, I mean, I think that one of the things that we see here in Arizona that's similar to Jay's experience is that we weren't set up to have that science forward mentality or the science forward ability. And by we, I mean compliance testing generally in the cannabis space. Right, like we were just a part of the Frankenstein of the rulemaking, world. Where like, hey, what's a real priority? Let's make sure that we stop sending people to prison for this. Okay, then we should probably figure out some licensing strategy. And oh crap, we got to figure out how to make sure that consumers are safe. So really, in the grand scheme of things, while we are labs, and while I am proud to say that we're a biomedical research facility, every time I get to choose an industry, on LinkedIn or whatnot, I mean, the reality is that we are a stop along the production schedule for a producer, whether it's a cultivator or a manufacturer. We are a box to check. And whether or not my colleagues across the lab space embrace that or acknowledge that or understand that is usually some type of indication of how successful they are in a market, right? You can be a PhD microbiologist and have, peer-reviewed journal papers in a variety of different publications, but it doesn't mean that TerraSend wants to test their, newest crop with you, or, that kind of thing, right? So I think your question is a really good one, Josh, but the frustration for a lot of us in the lab space is we weren't given the ability to focus on the things that science should allow us to focus on. We are the equivalent of a dry cleaner. You can't go and present your case in front of the judge unless your suit's clean, and you can't bring your product to, the Cure Leaf store or the True Leaf store, the Zen Leaf store, unless you have the COA in hand. So we are just a byproduct in many ways of the regulatory regimes that we're a part of.
No, I think that's just a brilliant response. It's so true, just how everyone's thrown into the mix without any kind of SOPs to begin with. You had to create it. You had to figure it out. You had to spend the money on trial and error. And there wasn't any kind of foresight to say, maybe we should extract some of this and look at it from a bigger, fundamental level. So I just think the reality of it is so raw and real that it was just perfect.
So Jay,
perfect storm for sure.
Yeah.
No, I was going to ask Jay, in California, you were kind of saying about the COA, are a lot of the growers and everybody testing their product before they even take it to the labs to get tested, like for their final? Are they doing COAs prior to getting their final
larger
COAs?
brands they're doing the research and development and working on that, because we're constantly making a better product. And if we can get the yields larger, they can get the yields larger. They're meeting the standards. They have a consistent product. I mean, the thing they're battling is consistency. And then once they get it down, you know, the environment changes, something changes, or the regulations change, and they have to be able to meet that. And so getting in front of it with the research and design, knowing that they're going to pass the COAs, means that they don't tie their commodities up with the state.
It's an interesting point. I mean, it's the regulations are just so crazy. It's here we're talking about testing and safety for people that use cannabis, and yet everybody has to like run around different circles to get around everything. And it's like, is it really like, are we really doing the right thing? Like, do you guys honestly think that we're testing for the right reasons and for the right things? I mean, I know toxins and them heavy metals and that sort of thing. Do you think we should be testing for other things as well, like other hazardous materials? And what do you feel about the testing industry?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you asked two questions there that sounded like they were the same, but they actually have an important distinction in that, are we testing for the right reasons? I think yes. Right. We want to make sure that as the consumer, you can have a general and a base level of expectation that what you see as part of the label claim is actually what you see, on the shelf. But if we're testing, the question is, are we testing for the right things? I think that is an entirely different set of answers, largely because, necessity is the mother of invention, right? It's like everyone knows that, right? But right now, even for trim, you can get a pound on the wholesale market here in Arizona for about maybe $250 to $300 for a pound of trim of regulated cannabis. Hemp you can get for maybe a couple of bucks, like maybe just the change I can find in my couch. And scientists and armchair chemists, if you will, are figuring out that if you have the right mix of battery acid and AC refrigerant under the right heat and temperature, you can actually synthesize the minuscule amounts of Delta 8 or Delta 9 in a hemp crop to actually turn it into a passable distillate. And that is actually crashing the market from a price comparison standpoint. But what we're not talking about is, because of the way that those processes are rapidly developing and reverting to things that we've outlawed in other industries decades ago, we aren't testing for those things anymore. I don't have R134A on my list of solvents that I have to test for. So someone can literally use the Freon that you have in any one of your cars to, synthesize hemp into something that you're going to be seeing in a cartridge or in a package on the shelf of a dispensary. And every analyte that we test for says that it's safe, but we don't tell you that there's vitamin E acetate in it or not, R134A, any number of these things, right? So I don't usually make a habit of quoting Donald Rumsfeld, but when he talks about the known unknowns or the unknown unknowns, like that's what we're dealing with here. And I think that, in other industries, such as the pharmaceutical industry, you don't have to give your secret sauce, but you not only have to test your final product, but you also have to test your byproduct and make sure that both are safe and as a part of your finished pharmaceutical grade. So, we have stuff that's coming out looking like antifreeze, and in best case scenario, clean antifreeze, not used antifreeze, right? But either one, I don't want to see as a part of something that I'm putting into my lungs one way or the other, right? And that's just my lungs. Some people are using that distillate for edibles, right? So, and we see these stories even with well-regulated industries like the candy industry that are finding dangerous levels of lead and cadmium and other, places in like high quality gourmet chocolates. What aren't we seeing because we're not testing for them? And I think that those questions really are never going to happen until the federal government sees us as an industry worthy of that level of respect. And I think that's like, those are all tied together for me. And as you can tell, I can go on and on about this. So I'm going to take a pause here and see if I'm on track or not.
No, I love the passion, Sam. You're clearly passionate about what you do, and I love it. And Jay, how do you feel about that in the whole industry and the testing?
Well, prior to testing, more unicorns had died than people smoking marijuana. So once we got regulated, then the testing and people were harmed. For the most part, people that produce marijuana took pride in it and they didn't want to hurt people. It was something they were sharing. We've lost that with the commercial thing. So we have to have the regulation. We have to have the testing. We have to have the knowledge. But the way that the table has been set in California is that the regulations supersede reality, whereas we want to put a safe product out. People growing it and manufacturing want to put a safe product out. We want to be able to be competitive financially. But between the regulations and the people not having the microbiologists get involved and say, hey, this is what's happening. This is how we need to consistently change. We need to hear back from the labs. We need to hear back from the outside producers. It's going to consistently change. It's a pioneering business, so we have to flex with it. But there's a lot of flaws in it, and it's being run by people that took a job, didn't necessarily want the job. It's matured a little bit, but we're still, brand new, trying to find people that want to be in this industry. And as you said, until the feds get involved, we're just seen as a stepbrother. It doesn't really have, any teeth.
Do you guys have any advice or final words on what consumers can do or how consumers can use testing to make more informed decisions on certain products?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first thing, and I know that I'm by far the first person to bring this up, but I'm proud of my training and my certification as a ganjier. It's a great program out of Northern California, kind of connection to what matters in terms of the analysis of high quality craft cannabis. And I think that consumers should always ask for the terpene profile testing. Potency is not any realistic gauge of quality. I tend to drink a lot less nowadays, but I never went to a bar and said, "Give me your highest potent, liquor." And just take a shot of Everclear just to get wildly drunk out of my mind, right? Like you want that journey, you want that symphonic expression of what the whole plant has to offer. So, and maybe I'm speaking just from an Arizona focused perspective, but most of our consumers, when they hear testing, what they're asking for is the potency. And I think that if we can divorce those two things, we'd go a really, really long way. I mean, some of my favorite cultivars routinely hit in the 15 to 17% THC range, but they're at that 4.5 to 5.5 terps, and they're just like, knocks you back on your ass. Like those kinds of things are what consumers should be. If I can be normative in my response here, that should be what matters. And I understand that some people pick up a bottle of $2 Chuck because it's what's affordable and it gets the job done. But having a really, really nice, properly aged Nebbiolo from the right region and the right vintage, that matters, right? So how are we going to get to that level with cannabis? And you start by asking for the terpenes, not for the potency.
I agree 100%. Do you guys think that some of the labs are falsifying the potency tests just because obviously if they're higher potencies, then you can sell more product, and if you can give a grower or producer higher potencies all the time, they're going to generally do better just because of what you're saying. Most consumers go in and ask for the highest THC percentage, which obviously isn't the correct thing to do.
I don't disagree at all, Doug. And I think that, I'm not trying to bring a religion or spirituality to it, but I think, there's this line that always sticks for me from Modest Yahoo, right? But a real like long-standing ancient Hasidic truth that the handle of the axe comes from the forest itself, right? So whether or not labs are falsifying potency numbers, I think the real question is, why? right? Like the producers are very aggressive, and they're aggressive because the consumer is aggressive, right? So we live in this really kind of toxic cycle that is potency first and potency only in some really damaging ways. So I don't know who stands up and puts a stop to it, but I think that the reason why labs have been at the center of it is they're the one producing the results. But there's been one case recently from a producer out of California that's in some other markets as well that got nabbed as the producer seeking those high numbers. And I think that may be the first of quite a few of those types of subtle shifts on the conversation, but a really important one, right? Like, we're a cog in the wheel, to one of the points that I was sharing earlier, right? So we only exist because our customers do. So, the question really is who is falsifying what, I think is maybe one question that I would throw back out there.
No, that's a great explanation. I really appreciate it. I appreciate both your times, Jay Fagerstrom from VRX Labs and Sam Richard. I didn't even get your last name before. And from On Point Labs, you guys were both actually on point today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you for enlightening our viewers about testing and the process. And you gave a lot of, I thought, educational information, and I really appreciate it. Josh, you have anything to end with?
I don't. No.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this part up because I think that was great. And we're going to go ahead, take a break. We'll be back. Everybody enjoy your little smoke break, and we'll see you for the last half hour. Again, Jay, Sam, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we'll see you soon.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways, and they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.
Which at first I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm an activist, but I have, held a bullhorn on the State House steps. I have frequently testified before the Cannabis Control Commission and the state legislature, and I'm not, shy about criticizing where I see, mistakes being made. So yeah, I think that's what differentiates me, just an appreciation for the plant. And then also I'm a cannabis entrepreneur myself. I've started businesses, so I've lived that entrepreneurial journey. I know how hard it is. It is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. So I think that, I'm in the game, not just on the sidelines.
Bay State.
Welcome back to a Green Rush Live, the last half hour. I hope everybody enjoyed that last smoke break. And we have two great guests on. I actually just realized the one guy, Josh Smith, that we have from Abco Labs, we actually were at a convention together. I just saw him pop up and I was like, wow, I definitely know him. We sat at a table together. And then we have Mark Hubbard from Integrity Labs. So I just gonna have Mark introduce himself, tell us a little bit about Integrity Labs, and then we'll talk to Josh and get things rolling. So Mark, go ahead. Tell us about Integrity Labs and where you're located.
Yeah, hi guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, Integrity Labs is located in Olympia, Washington. We're a certified lab for the state of Washington for the recreational system. And we also do private testing as well and lab development. So been doing it for a minute. I think we licensed our lab with the state of Washington in 2014. A couple of years before that, in 2012, we had started Integrity as Integrity testing for the medical market that existed since 1998 in Washington State.
Very cool. And Josh, tell us a little bit about Abco Labs and where you're located.
Yeah, so Abco is located in Warren, Michigan, so essentially Detroit, and has been open since, I think, officially licensed 2020, started in 2019, and then before that, I also have been helped start up and run another lab in Madison, Wisconsin that did and does low THC, so hemp, CBD, and all that other stuff.
And Josh, that's where you were when we met. You were in Madison, Wisconsin. I definitely remember. So
still live there, but
okay, very cool, very cool. And so, how did you make the jump to this new lab?
Amy, the former owner, Amy, was still part owner, was looking to bring on people and realized it was a little more than she could handle with herself, and we kind of jumped in.
Nice, very nice. All right, let's get into the whole testing part of the industry. So Mark, I'm going to ask you right off the bat, what's the biggest issue you've seen with the flower and product that comes in for testing?
Well, I think it's all the discrepancy or the misunderstanding about how the process of testing cannabis actually works for the state of Washington. Of course, it's a little bit different from the unregulated state, for instance, of Wisconsin, and maybe that market, as well as another regulated market of Michigan. So those laws are a little bit different, but I think nobody really understands. I think it's just a mystery. We just wave this magic pixie dust and we just put a number on a piece of paper. And it's been that way for a decade plus. So it's nothing new for me to be questioned on why test results happen and where the variables are within accuracy.
Do you want to explain how the product works, how you take the product from when it gets to your hands through the testing process? Could you explain that to our viewers?
Sure. Well, there's different protocols that are established by the state as far as how samples are taken from a lot or from a selection. In the case of Washington State, samples are pulled by the producer or processor that created that sample. They package it, they give an appropriate amount that's allocated based on the state, based on the testing that's being performed. We'll receive that test, document it, bring it into a controlled limb system. So it's an inventory management system, which documents where this sample has to go, what tests it needs to be performed on it, and at the end, what quality control needs to be completed on that sample to determine accuracy for that, which is determined for. In the case of Washington State, it's for certification of a lot for testing. So it could be microbial, potency. Now tests have started to require pesticide testing depending on at what stage. So it really depends on what kind of product it's brought in and has it had prior testing or not. It just kind of depends on the state of it, but it's taken into control. It's pushed through a system internally. It's documented. It's numbered, and then the results are qualified by a lab director, and those results are published to the client.
Great. And then, yeah, they give you your COA and you're happy and good to go, and you can sell your product. Josh, how often do you see moldy product at your at the lab that you're testing?
That's a loaded question. If it's grown out, so my background is actually clinical microbiology. That's my graduate degree. If it's grown outside, you will fail for mold, hands down. If you grow outside, it is a living being, a living organism. You will have yeast and mold on it. So I would recommend inside, but it really depends on the area you live. Are you growing indoors? Are you growing outside? How's the weather? Even if you're growing indoors, if you have a less than perfect, environmental system in your grow area, you'll have a higher humidity in the air and you'll get mold. Also, I notice when I go to grow rooms, because this is actually something we would offer, is to, if somebody's having problems passing, which, sometimes they just go to a lab that has a different cutoff for it and gets through. But, you go to look at grow rooms, an easy thing to look for is to see where the airflow is, because really mold is telling you either your HEPA filters are burned or you have dead spots in your grow area. So if you don't have anything going at the lower area, you've got all the giant canopy space, but a lot of times there's those fans blowing down on top that you can see everything moving, but a lot of times there's almost nothing down below, and you can get these little microclimates that will help mold grow.
Interesting. Very good. Very cool. Josh, you have anything to ask these gentlemen? They're full of knowledge. You can tell that.
Well, yeah. And so, yeah, Mark and I are both from Washington State. So I know he knows the whole, sorry, the dogs barking are just part of the listening experience today, I guess. But Mark, you've seen a lot of the pay to play on that. I'm wondering, how did that get started? Was it where labs in the very beginning were like, yeah, we'll go ahead and give you whatever you want? Or was it a matter of people saying, hey, we really want 34%? So curious, like, how did it get started? What was the frequency? Why did it stop? Like, how did they get busted? Can you just walk us through the pay to play on asking for a higher THC percentage and some of the dirty side to the testing labs? Because you've been there, you've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely a game that clients played early on. They wanted the biggest percentage because at one time in Washington State, the highest number was the thing that sold the most. And we were the first experiment, Washington State was, with, how do you regulate this new industry and system? Most definitely, I had people offer me money to falsify test results, but this is a liability situation. Early on, we had 2,800 customers in Washington State, so licensed producers and processors that either grew or manufactured product. They had to compete based on a number or based on quality. What would you rather compete based on? And I think over the evolution of the last 10 years in Washington State cannabis, we've seen that 95% doesn't exist in concentrates anymore. We can actually see the difference in a profile between a sugar wax and a diamonds and sauce based on how it's put back together in the plant. And people are not dumb. They can smoke something that's 41% flower. We can go all the way back to Venture Magazine that posted an article about a farm in Washington State that grew 41% cannabis. It just sent a shake through the entire industry, and that magazine put an exclamation point instead of a question mark. It just really doesn't exist in all these other states, and we'll see other states pop up and try and play this game. But when in the long run you have to compete against quality, and they go, well, gosh, I smoked this and it was 41%, but then I smoked this strawberry cough that's historically 9 or 10%. If you want to follow genetic profiling over the history of life, because we just don't create something out of midair. We can go, hey, that is actually what I want. I want a lower THC cannabis because I want these effects. I don't want just high THC and only one number focus. So it was well, right now in Washington State, there's 600 companies left. There were 2,800. Some of them went out of business based on hijinks and deceiving a consumer. I think over time we'll realize what NIST is, what defrauding a consumer is, and how quality is more important than a number.
So with that said, and I know the THC percentage means absolutely nothing. I've always said I go to dispensaries, I'll go dispensary hop, and I go.
Well, here's
smoke
where it
out.
means something. It means something in an edible, because if you take a 10 milligram versus 100 milligram,
big difference.
well, how does accuracy matter there? I mean, come on, we can do better as labs. Unfortunately, labs don't understand the variables within their own facility. And when cannabis testing is so new, we can blame certain things that maybe we just don't understand, or we can give good advice to guide them to provide better quality by designing a better process internally, so you eliminate variables that create failures in micro or yeast and mold. And even yeast and mold testing over time has changed, because he's right, yeast and mold is in everything. But to what thresholds should the state be testing for to make it safe?
So what's the most common heavy metals that you see, Josh, when you're doing some testing?
So actually, there's a few ways. The short answer is it depends. And the more complicated answer is I was listening in on your earlier segments, and how there was a comment about lab tests being more than just you can sell your shit, right? One of those tests is heavy metals. It's not just about, oh, I can pass this, especially if you're in a grow room. It's a controlled environment. You should not be failing any of those. But if you go and look at, they give you an indication, right? So if you have lead and you're failing for lead, that means your water filtration has gone to hell. You need to replace your water filters. If you see high levels of arsenic, are you using rock wool? Because and check your batch and lot numbers. So this is also goes back to the GMP that you should be setting up for your facility if you're not already, and you better damn well be getting close to it, because once the FDA decides to do anything, they will make you. Which goes into beginning, middle, and end of batch lot testing, which no one wants to talk about either. But, so arsenic, depending on where they make the rock wool from, that rock that they pull it's volcanic soil, it's volcanic rock. And sometimes they'll spike levels of arsenic in it. So, cadmium, usually, again, water. So we don't see much. Usually, if anything, it's lead. A little bit of nickel, but it's Detroit. So the soil and the groundwater and everything over there's a little iffy at times. So, but like copper, you're going to see anytime. Actually, Chris, who is one of your earliest guests today, he was the first presentation I ever saw at a convention, and I don't know if you'll remember it, but it was Rochester, Minnesota. And he brought in pictures of vape machines, of vapes samples, that he had a smoking machine hooked up that would pull from the vape. And there were visible to the naked eye metal shavings coming out from the shoddy vape hardware. So and then also sometimes you'll see concentrates that will pass when it comes from the producer, but when it's put into the vapes and then tested as a vape, it will fail based on, again, shoddy hardware. So you can usually, another one that you'll see is if you're using a busking machine or something like that, and it's a brand new machine, always, before you run any product through it, put a bunch of crap in through it that you have no desire to ever use, because there's little bits and shavings on there that, just being a brand new machine, will get flaked off in your product, and then you'll test for nickel. So my dad was a machinist. I learned that one in the old-fashioned way. But we actually had a couple of people that tested a couple of batches, and they failed for nickel, but it was only at the beginning of the batch. Towards the end of the batch, they tested a second one and it passed. And that led us to finally track it down to the nickel, and it was elevated cadmium too.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I guess you're saying, so if they're failing, they're literally failing for a reason. And a lot of times it could just be the water that they're using.
None of these tests, these are quality control tests. They're safety tests, but they're also quality control. So if you're failing them, there's something in your process that you're doing wrong. or that is breaking down. So, I mean, there's a lot of value in these things. Yeah, another one was arsenic. You can pick up if you have rat traps hanging out. You won't fail. Well, we've actually seen detectable levels from rat traps in the grow room have popped up occasionally. They were still below the fail rate, but they're there. So if you're seeing these things in a closed loop system, there's an issue. And you want to make the best product, the most efficient product, that you can. These are the places that you get that information to help your system.
We've been asking some genetic questions about cultivars that prevent some of these, not pesticides, but mold and mildew and those issues. Mark, have you seen anything that pops a lot where you're like, damn, that particular strain is guilty all the time versus another one where you never see it?
Yeah, we definitely experienced this in Washington with a lot of the coastal growers trying to grow very dense buds that just won't finish, just as they won't dry. Growing in an outdoor environment where you don't have enough time for the plant to fully finish, a long flowering indica. You just got to tailor that genetic to the environment that you're growing in. Greenhouse growing creates a higher humidity environment. If you grow in a humid area like Michigan or Wisconsin or anywhere in the Midwest, you're going to have to tailor your cultivar to fit appropriately.
Is that why we don't see Blue Dream? Is because a couple of years ago we saw some early rain, some early snow, and it ruined outdoor harvest, and people just said that takes too long? Or is that not one of them that's a longer grow?
Yeah, I think Blue Dream's a tough one because there's so many different varieties within that. Northern County Humboldt Growers Association did extensive development with Blue Dream and extensive research as well, growing at so many valleys away from the coast. Jorgie and that group over there is just super intelligent, and they just go way down these little rabbit holes to understand that. But no, we've seen this over time. We can't grow Dutch treat or Durban poison in Western Washington. It's a high Afghani strain, so it grows extremely well in Denver. We notice the same thing if you want to compare plant to plant. Wine is kind of similar in this. You grow in certain regions, you can grow certain varieties better than others, and those varieties are more naturally adapt to those the issues that environment can create.
Mm-hmm. Josh, are you seeing anything where people are growing, trying to get the most THC? And so we've seen in Washington State, people grow super crispy, dry buds where it's like powder, just because I'm assuming they're just trying to drive up that THC by drying it out. I'm assuming there's still kind of that inverse relationship between dryness and THC. Is that accurate? Are you seeing that? What's happening in your area?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the amount so your moisture content and water activity. So I don't remember what Washington is. It's been a while since I've seen the regs. Do you guys do water activity or do you do moisture content?
Moisture.
It's both water activity and moisture content. I mean, water activity is what are the active potential compounds that are in that. It's more appropriate for an edible. Yeah. Moisture content's more appropriate for flower. But yeah, I think it's a range between 2 to 10%. But I mean, let's just do the math. I mean, if you change 10% moisture, what's to 10% end result? If you have a 20% flower, you're not going to move it more than 2 points just by drying it out. So what does that really gain you as far as an end result?
I will say on the hemp side, they definitely tried to game that system a little bit, and I've seen it with some of the some of the recreational stuff in Michigan. We also have the potency wars in Michigan badly. I get asked weekly if I'll fix numbers or bump numbers. And everyone says, "Oh, well, this lab does it. Why don't you? I'll give you extra money." And it's every week. But what I've seen mostly though is people they're trying to grow a little more dense than they are dry them out. But there's a slight push, and I'm very happy to see they're starting to push the terpenes more. Like we do a 38 panel for terpenes. That it's kind of the whole, everyone remembers, oh, I smoked this Blue Dream in California, but then they can move here. Somebody says, oh, that sold really well. I have something that I looks like it, but kind of isn't, but not. So I'm going to name it that in this other state way down the way. But if it's got the terpene profile that's close, it tends to have the same effects, at least anecdotally. And I think we're starting to see more people looking at the high terpene content. They're looking at the 2%, 3%, the 4%, if you can get them that high. We have had people claim that they have 50% THC in their flower, which is genetically impossible, but yeah.
Let them believe it, right?
Well, I mean, they've done a few studies and there's a few papers out there. One of them that your actual receptors max out about 16 to 20%. Like anything above that really doesn't do anything except get you there faster. Yeah, it's just you get there faster. But you can go down the street and buy barrel-aged 20-year-old scotch, or you can buy Everclear. Which one are you going to pick? You don't want the moonshine because it tastes like ass. You want that 20-year-old scotch. And I think people are starting to realize that, but it's an uneducated consumer. They don't know anything other than I want to get high. I know THC gets me high. That's it. We as industry, as labs, as growers, producers, somebody's got to take the bullet and start pushing that, what all those other things. It's the cannabinoid profile. It's your CBD, CBG. It's not just the THC that's doing things. It's all those other effects coming together in the entourage. I've heard another word for it, but I can't remember it. But the terpene profile, what those effects are doing it's why it makes it so hard to do clinical trials on anything, because there's so many variables to get that same effect that it's hard to pin down to anything to actually do a double-blind study.
Mm-hmm. Can you guys leave us with some information on how consumers can use lab data to make better or more informed decisions?
Mark, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. I mean, there's so much that happens behind the scenes that the consumer doesn't really get to be privy to. I think the consumer needs to realize that they've got protection behind them. They can sue these manufacturers for fraud and for being deceived. And if labs want to participate in that chain of fraud, and the companies want to have their names plastered all over the place, I can tell you many stories in Washington State about labs and companies that just don't exist anymore because they thought that this was the way to get out of their mistakes. So the consumer's in a bad spot, and I'm sorry to say that, but when more sliding morality has entered into the lab testing, and that's the testing. Dogs, you got cat. Sorry about that. But I think go with what the effects tell you. As much as you can find out about the grower, that's definitely the way that you want to get the best information. The companies that do the testing and over test are more than upfront about all the testing that they do and how they approach it. So I would reach out to their websites and contact the companies direct and do some research on them.
I would tack on to that. I mean, if you as a consumer at an actual consumer level, ask them to see the COA. If if they're reputable, they should be willing to give that to you, hands down, no problem, easy. I mean, hell, most of them are putting them out there, because there are places out there that really do want to go above and beyond with testing, make things safe, and they are very upfront about it. If they're any whatever cagey about it, that's when you should start looking and be worried about it. If you're say you're a edible producer or producer or manufacturer, ask to get a second opinion from a second lab from that batch that you're buying, if for flower, because there's plenty of places that will definitely, you'll contradict, but you should be within 2 to a couple of percent either side. I mean, measurement of uncertainty for most potency tests that I've seen in most labs are 5% or less. So whatever that number is, you should be getting somewhat close. But also too, ask, if you're checking things and you even want to go to the lab, ask the lab, how do they do it? if they can't explain it to you, it's simply, or even if they can't explain how it's done at all or won't explain it to you, I'd be a little nervous about that lab. I mean, yes, they're not going to go into the full nuts and bolts of, oh, we did, step 1, step 2, step 3, but like ABCO, methanol extraction, triple methanol extraction for 8 minutes a piece, and then it's run on an HPLC. I mean, it's not a proprietary secret. That's not how science works. I mean, if you go in the clinical world, I was in pharma R&D for 15 years or 12 years before this, and you go into a hospital and you get a medical test and say it's for something even like whooping cough or pertussis. When you get your results back, it will have literally everything down to the DNA sequence of that bacteria that they use, the primer, the sequence that they use to get that test, and everything about it. But they make billions of dollars off those tests. So, it's either, this is science, and in order to compare apples to apples, you have to at least know what the apples are or what the fruit is. So just ask. And if you think it feels off, it probably is, because in this industry, unfortunately, like Mark was saying earlier, when I was in grad school, you never thought, you get those ethics courses that you have to take in school that they give you the stupidest things ever as examples, and you never think that's going to happen. And then in this industry, it happens once a week, and their examples are even worse, dumber than what you thought they were in college. So just ask.
Yeah. Any last words, Mark?
No, it's good to see you, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for spreading the information and putting facts out there.
Yeah, it's great to finally have you on. So Doug, you got anything else you want to add to this before we wrap up?
No, I think that was great. Mark Hubbard from Integrity Labs, Josh Smith from ABCO Labs, just excellent information. Really appreciate your time on a Friday afternoon on the Green Rush Live. And I hope everybody has a nice weekend, and we'll see you next week. And Josh Kincaid, thank you so much. We're out of here.
Yeah, as Jimmy says, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Have a great weekend.
Yep. But
which at first I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm an activist, but I have, held a bullhorn on the State House steps. I have frequently testified before the Cannabis Control Commission and the state legislature, and I'm not, shy about criticizing where I see, mistakes being made. So yeah, I think that's what differentiates me, just an appreciation for the plant. And then also I'm a cannabis entrepreneur myself. I've started businesses, so I've lived that entrepreneurial journey. I know how hard it is. It is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. So I think that, I'm in the game, not just on the sidelines.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, Twitter and Google ease restrictions for commercial messaging for cannabis, hemp-derived CBD products, and that's the first time that's ever happened. A Senate committee approves a cannabis standalone bill allowing the Veterans Administration to research the plant medicinal impact on PTSD and other ailments for veterans. Also, in our nation's capital, New York Senator Chuck Schumer meets with Republicans to figure out what compromises are necessary for a bipartisan cannabis reform bill to move through the Senate. And an unlicensed cannabis store just 300 feet from City Hall in New York blatantly continues to operate and sell product despite promises from law enforcement to continue to assess fines, and now they're going after the owners of that building. Yes, it's the wild, wild west in the Big Apple on the streets of Manhattan. All that and more on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. Next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto. There's been a major change in restrictions on cannabis advertising. Two of the biggest social media platforms, Twitter and Google, have softened their policies on advertising CBD products and also THC products. AdCan first reported these changes, and Twitter guidelines will still be subject to pre-approval by their internal content review group. And up until now, only topical CBD products were allowed. Well, now there are still some limitations, like targeting messages to people over 21, and there can be no sale of THC products and informational ads for licensed companies operating in legal states. Well, now you know why Elon Musk, the new owner of Twitter, sent out a teaser tweet of the numbers 420 last week. That was viewed over 75 million times and picked up over 500,000 likes before this announcement was even made. Now let's talk about Google. Their new policy will allow the promotion of FDA-approved pharmaceuticals containing CBD or cannabidiol. This will allow topical hemp-derived CBD products with less than 0.3% THC to be marketed. All messages, though, have to be approved by Legit Script, a company dedicated to screening internet messages. Back in Washington, D.C., the Senate leader of the cannabis reform movement is New York Senator Chuck Schumer. Over the past week, he has been meeting with Republicans in the Senate to see exactly what reforms to the federal cannabis laws they would be comfortable with. Pro-Cannabis Media will have an update on federal legalization with the political director for NORML, Morgan Fox, on Green Rush Live at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday. Cannabis has been legal in Oregon and Washington state for decades now, but that hasn't stopped corruption and backhanded deals. Marianne Kersagi has this week's report from the Beaver State.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with this week's Oregon Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. The news out of the OLCC continues to get airtime. A number of high-level managers and directors diverted expensive liquor for themselves. The ethics probe has continued with the criminal investigation. The governor has appointed Chris Prinz as interim director. We'll see what changes he makes. And Oregon's legislature is once again considering increasing cannabis sales taxes, which would punish an already struggling industry and create incentives for customers to flock to the unregulated market for their product. And finally, the previously reported recall of vapes sold under the Firefly Extracts and Smoke Right Wellness brands has been expanded. These vapes include artificially derived cannabinoids, which are prohibited under Oregon law. And Firefly Extracts has gone out of business. So not sure if it was because of the recall or if they were already in trouble, but they are out of the market. That'll do it for the Oregon Report this week. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Weed Talk News.
The only state in New Zealand that has not legalized the adult use of cannabis yet is New Hampshire. That might be changing soon. A legislative committee submitted a new bipartisan plan to the House of Representatives in that state that would add cannabis jurisdiction to their state-run liquor program. The committee had to give up the right to grow cannabis at home and the expungement of past records, but it does allow adults over the age of 21 to possess and gift up to 4 ounces. There would not be a sales tax, and this is New Hampshire, but there would be a 15% tax on cultivation. Existing medical dispensaries can apply for an adult license within 18 months of the approved bill, and there will be no cap on the amount of licenses approved by the state. Another interesting item in this bill is that licensed businesses will not have to worry about 280E and will be able to deduct business expenses from their taxes. Needless to say, having a state-run cannabis operation would impact the flock of Granite State residents who go over the border to get their weed in Vermont, Maine, or Massachusetts. And with this week's Massachusetts report, here's PCM founder Jimmy Young.
This is the Massachusetts Cannabis Report brought to you by Holyoke Cannabis. I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Weed Talk News. Now, you might remember that during the pandemic that medical dispensaries were allowed to stay open and curbside pickup became the staple for many patients. Former Governor Charlie Baker denied curbside pickup for adult use, but kept that open for medical patients. Now, the Cannabis Control Commission is extending curbside pickup for the medical cannabis patient community. They also are going to continue to allow virtual appointments with doctors to approve or renew your medical card. Now, while there was quite a run on medical cards during the pandemic, the total number of patients now in the Commonwealth is down to 96,000 people. It was at over 160,000 people. Speaking of dispensaries, we visited quite a few over the years, but one is definitely a destination dispensary. It's INSA in East Hampton. They've been renting the real estate where they operate their manufacturing operation at 122 Pleasant Street, and now they bought it for $2.7 million. INSA is splitting the entire space at the old Keystone Mill with their old landlord, and the property will be split into 2 condominium business units. INSA operates 3 dispensaries, one in Salem, one in Springfield, and one in East Hampton, and also has operations in Florida and Pennsylvania. Now, one more note, the Massachusetts Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy is made up of elected state senators and House of Representatives. Now, they will be led by Senator Adam Gomez and Representative Daniel Donahue. That will do it for this week's Bay State Cannabis Report, brought to you by Holyoke Cannabis. I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Weed Talk News. Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
Over in Europe, some countries are just starting their legal medical programs, like Greece. But the big story is that Amsterdam has banned consumption in their red light district. Lex Pelger has more from France.
I'm Lex Pelger from Whitewell Creation with this week's European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. In Greece, the first ever pharmaceutical cannabis production plant has been opened in Corinth by the EU arm of the Israeli firm Tikkun Olam. The €40 million facility had an opening ceremony with leading politicians and the local Greek Orthodox priest. The plant will be able to produce cannabis in various pharmaceutical forms for export across the EU. In Norway, one of the most cautious European states on the cannabis issue, they had their very first public meeting to discuss medical cannabis. Bringing together a coalition of doctors, patients, politicians, and industry stakeholders, the meeting represented the very first steps towards reform. While the country officially legalized access to medical cannabis under very special circumstances in 2016, almost no patients can currently access the medicine, and even CBD is only available by prescription and in limited quantities. Patients report that doctors are hostile to even hearing about cannabis and will put them on a blacklist that limits them from other treatment options. According to a survey, over 75% of Norwegian patients acquire their medicine from the black market or grow it themselves. Hopefully, this first step will lead Norway to emulate their more tolerant neighbors like the Netherlands or Denmark. Speaking of the Netherlands, the historic red light district of Amsterdam will be banning the consumption of cannabis on the street. After a local campaign to improve livability, the new law goes into effect this May and will also restrict the availability of alcohol. As someone who visited Amsterdam this weekend for my 40th birthday, I can report that the use of grass on the street happens, but is not overwhelming. However, I might have a different opinion if I live there. That's the European Cannabis Report for this week. For more on the science side, see my newsletter on Substack, Cannabinoids and the People. I'm Lex Pelger from Whitewell Creations, reporting for Weed Talk News.
There's some movement at the federal level on cannabis reform, and it concerns our veterans. For the first time ever, a standalone proposal by a U.S. Senate committee has approved a bill for research and cannabis access to military veterans. The VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act will now be able to study the therapeutic potential for cannabis with veterans who suffer from PTSD and chronic pain. That's been a long time coming. The Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt is on assignment this week, so we turn to our man with his eye and his trading insight, too high on Wall Street's Doug Miller, for this week's Cannabis Stock Report.
Hello, everyone. Doug Miller here from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Weed Talk News. Today, we're going to discuss something different, ETFs. And if you're not familiar with an ETF, that's an exchange traded fund. And what they are a bundle of assets that you can buy and sell during regular trading hours. And they are generally in a particular sector or industry. So today we are going to go over the cannabis ETFs. And let's start with the stock ticker MJ. It is ETF MG Alternative Harvest. That one's curling up. Stock ticker POTX. It is Global X Cannabis ETF. That is curling up. And stock ticker TOKE. Cambria Cannabis ETF. That one's curling up. And when I see in a ETF all of them starting to curl up, I know in that sector something's happening. So I'm keeping my eye on the cannabis sector and stocks because they look like they want to take a run. And so here's some ETFs. You can take a look at them. They do trade volatile, but they will move fast. They can pull back fast. So you have to keep your eye on them at all times if you get involved. And just trade safely and check them out. And that is this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Doug Miller.
In Canada, the first G7 nation to legalize cannabis continues to have growing pains. Once again, it's the competition from the legacy market that is dictating a price decline. Debbie Facey has more from Canada.
Hi, this is Debbie Facey from Weed Talk News, your Canadian correspondent, with this week's Toke of the Week. What we have here in Canada this week, I should say, unfortunately, again, is the numbers showing and demonstrating the tumbling in the wholesale market. In 2022, we had found that there was a 40% decline in the wholesale market when it came to cannabis. That meant that most of the producers that were actually creating the cannabis, or I should say growing the cannabis, found that they were not only overproducing, but having to price cut most of the cannabis that they had produced and that were now not expired, but were past date, and which also led to their percentages of their THC to also go down, which led to the original pricing of, let's just say, the wholesale of a gram being around $1.90, going down to $1.06 per se after the past due date and the overproduction. That is one thing that many of the Canadian LPs and brands are noticing and having to adjust now due to the fact that most of them are now going into the, sad to say, negative. What we also have that is going to be starting, and it is a great thing for most of the smaller mom and pop shops, or I should say independent shops here in Canada, especially in Ontario, is going to be a cap when it comes to the price markup that most of these brands and LPs are able to do. When it comes to the pricing of the cannabis here in Ontario and in all of Canada, some of the brands and some of the LPs have a way of being able to mark up or mark down their cannabis and also be able to give incentives to stores that are able to afford it. For the stores that are not able to afford it, that's where they do end up finding that they have a decline in sales or they're not able to keep up. As of September 2023, the OCS is implementing a cap when it comes to the percentage that the brands are able to work with, which means that they will only be able to work with a marginalized number, which will make a over across the board, way for many of these shops to only compete in a ethical and moral way, but also at the same time be able to have some of these brands and products that they weren't able to hold on their shelves prior. This also gives many of these brands a time to be able to adjust their pricing, adjust their product lines, their SKUs, as well as any of the ingredients, like with the edibles, that they may have to change due to the implementation of wanting to lower the THC content in our edibles here in Ontario. This is Debbie Facey with We Talk News, your Canadian correspondent with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
The state of Missouri continues to set sales records, and now they have a Super Bowl championship to celebrate after the Kansas City Chiefs knocked off the Philadelphia Eagles. Sure enough, open consumption of the plant was in abundance for their city celebration, and Brandon Jones was on hand and has our Missouri report.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. And that's right, this week, my guys, the Chiefs, came down with another Super Bowl. And the parade was this Wednesday in downtown Kansas City. Started at 12, went till 1:45 around when they got to the actual podiums right in front of Union Square, where they're going to have the draft as well this year. So Kansas City is kind of getting on the map. Got the World Cup, got this. And then I don't know if you saw the release, but Wiz Khalifa is also coming to Kansas City on 4/20. The Super Bowl, though, was pretty amazing. The parade, people started showing up around 6:30 in the morning to get spots. And yes, as they were talking about, open consumption was all over the place. The city of Kansas City is decriminalized. And as we just saw, rec passed and just started here February 8th. So it's been quite a crazy month here in February for Missouri. Won the Super Bowl, getting the NFL draft, rec started, and we did almost 13 million just the first week of rec sales. We actually doubled Illinois' first weekend, and we are half their population. So quite a turnout from the Missouri people. And at the parade, we talked about consumption was all over. Radio stations were talking about, hey, I think I smelled a dead skunk, but 10 minutes later, the smell was gone. I wonder what that was. So there was a lot of fun inferences, people around just using open consumption. And like I said, it is decriminalized in the city of Kansas City itself, whether you're on the Kansas side or the Missouri side. I don't know if most people know, but the state line runs right down the middle. So it's been quite a crazy time here in Missouri the last few weeks, and excited for everybody to have open consumption. There are some, like I said, fun concerts getting ready to start. 420 is going to be the biggest one at the Smoky Entertainment District, sponsored by the Best May Wellness Crew. Going to be quite an event. So really excited things are happening here in Missouri. So come out here, check it out, come out for 420. Again, I'm Brandon Jones from B Green Distribution, Missouri Cannabis Report for We Talk News. Everybody stay medicated and educated. Have a great week.
On the losing side of that Super Bowl is Philadelphia. On Thursday, their pro-cannabis Senator John Fetterman checked himself into the hospital to address his clinical depression issues. No one is reporting that this had anything to do with the Eagles losing the Super Bowl, because mental health is serious, and the senator has battled that diagnosis for years. But keeping medical records private is now becoming a battle in that state, and Claudia Post has more in her Pennsylvania report.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. A new bill in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives would allow Pennsylvania farmers to grow medical cannabis. In a memo to House members, a few representatives said they plan to introduce the bill to allow for accessible and equitable entry into the medical cannabis industry. The bill would allow new permits for farmers and other small agricultural ventures, and they can apply for these licenses to grow medical cannabis. Farmers and small enterprises are denied the freedom to share in the nearly $2 billion that has been generated by the industry to date. So passing this legislation would allow open doors for new growers, including those marginalized communities. The Pennsylvania Department of Health is again suing Spotlight PA, which is a publication, in an attempt to keep information about how patients obtain a medical marijuana card, and they want to keep it secret from the public. This time, the health department does not want to reveal how often individual physicians approve patients for the medical program. The State Office of Open Records gave the health department 30 days to hand over relevant records. But the health department refused, and this month appealed to Commonwealth Court in an action that will likely delay access to the records for at least several months, if not permanently. Withholding that information makes it harder to understand how medical marijuana law is working. Data can point to successes, and it can also point to failures. And those are the things we need to understand through policy. And if we can't understand how the law is working by inspecting the data, it's very hard for lawmakers to advocate for change where necessary. As the legislative session picks up here in Pennsylvania, lawmakers are considering a host of changes to the state's cannabis laws that would expand who is eligible for medical marijuana and increase protections against DUI charges for patients. And the new Democratic majority in the State House is bringing full, fresh hope to advocates who want to see Pennsylvania join dozens of states where possessing a small amount of cannabis is legal or decriminalized. The 5 proposals to watch in this legislative section are overhauling the medical program, decriminalization, DUI protections, employment rules, and legalization. We are looking to bring rec into Pennsylvania. That's a wrap. I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From Weed Talk News, have a fabulous week.
There are now 5 cannabis adult use dispensaries in Burlington, Vermont alone, as that adult use market is starting to gain traction. Jessie Lynn Dolan has more from the Green Mountain State.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Senator Sears and Rahm Hinsdale introduced a bill that proposes to lift the potency limits on cannabis products sold, while another bill from several Republicans calls to repeal the adult use market in its entirety. Slang Worldwide, holding both a medical and adult use integrated license, issued 100 million extra shares to former stakeholders, thanks to the better than anticipated beginning of Vermont adult use sales. Lastly, a thank you goes out to Graham Central Retailer in Montpelier for the most recent expungement clinic that was held on February 15th. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Cannatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at cannatrolls.com.
And finally, tonight, a battle is brewing in the Big Apple. It seems that there is an illegal cannabis store called the Jungle Boys that is located just 283 feet away from the New York City Hall. This store has been fined and product confiscated over the past few months of their operation, and they keep operating and making sales. Now that the state is rolling out its legal licenses, there is growing pressure on the mayor's office to go after these illegal operations. Now law enforcement is going after that landlord of that building in order to stop the sale of cannabis at that location. The problem is, of course, getting an eviction of a tenant, even if they are breaking the new law. There are more than 1,400 illegal cannabis stores who are operating inside the New York City limits. Jungle Boys has been fined, raided, and over $150,000 worth of product has been confiscated. Jungle Boys and others are still open and operational, even though there are now 3 legal licensed operators within the city limits. Never a dull moment in the city that never sleeps, unless, of course, they buy indica. In that case, might be sleeping. That's it for Weed Talk News this week. I'm Elena Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore, so I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now, if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegits filtration system. What? The Weegits.com, Weegits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems. Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weegits filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCM TV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Which at first I thought, oh, I don't know if I'm an activist, but I have, held a bullhorn on the State House steps. I have frequently testified before the Cannabis Control Commission and the state legislature, and I'm not, shy about criticizing where I see, mistakes being made. So yeah, I think that's what differentiates me, just an appreciation for the plant. And then also I'm a cannabis entrepreneur myself. I've started businesses, so I've lived that entrepreneurial journey. I know how hard it is. It is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. So I think that, I'm in the game, not just on the sidelines.
As a broker, we have access to many, many cannabis carriers. So I will go in with 2 or 3 quotes for people. The quotes might be $20,000 for one, $22,000 for another, $17,500 for another. Pretty close among the 3. What I tell people is it's not the pricing, it's what's included and not included, meaning exclusions. An exclusion in layman's terms is just something that's not included. It's not on the menu. So it's just not included. But if you don't know that, if no one shows you that on page 71 of a 150-page policy, you're not going to know. No one knows. I never met one person that says they read an insurance policy. If you do, I got some property in Florida for you.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, Twitter and Google ease restrictions for commercial messaging for cannabis, hemp-derived CBD products, and that's the first time that's ever happened. A Senate committee approves a cannabis standalone bill allowing the Veterans Administration to research the plant medicinal impact on PTSD and other ailments for veterans. Also, in our nation's capital, New York Senator Chuck Schumer meets with Republicans to figure out what compromises are necessary for a bipartisan cannabis reform bill to move through the Senate. And an unlicensed cannabis store just 300 feet from City Hall in New York blatantly continues to operate and sell product despite promises from law enforcement to continue to assess fines, and now they're going after the owners of that building. Yes, it's the wild, wild west in the Big Apple on the streets of Manhattan. All that and more on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. Next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto. There's been a major change in restrictions on cannabis